Welcome to Dallas Dirt. I'm your host, April Towery. I'm the City Hall reporter for CandysDirt.com, and our guest today is Paul Ridley, the District 14 Dallas City Councilman. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, April, for having me.
Sure. We got lots to talk about today. So you guys just had I won't call it a marathon council meeting. You've had some marathons. This one ended at a reasonable hour, but on September 25th, you adopted or approved, what's the proper terminology?
Approved.
Okay, the ForwardDallas Comprehensive Land Use Plan, which you had a big hand in crafting or amending kind of up until the last minute. And tell me how we got to September 25th.
Well, it was a long, protracted process, April. It started with the Comprehensive Land Use Committee of the City Plan Commission about 2 years ago, and they had recommendations that they made to the City Plan Commission. The Plan Commission then took about 6 months to hold public hearings to get input from residents and stakeholders around the city, and then they made recommendations in turn to the City Council in late July. And we took it up at the committee level in August with a very preliminary meeting of the Economic Development Committee just a few days after the Plan Commission had approved their recommendations. And then we had a more substantive committee meeting later in September of the Economic Development Committee. And it was there that we really, for the first time at the council level, grappled with the language of the plan.
Why is that language so important? We've heard people say this plan just sits on a shelf. I know you don't like that characterization, but any developer can point to what they need to do and have this plan support it. So why does the language matter?
Well, the whole plan matters because it is a policy statement of where the city would like to see the development of Dallas go in the next 10 or 20 years. It is very important to have that kind of a policy statement in place because the rezoning process needs guidance. It shouldn't just be a process of looking at each individual application in a silo. Instead, it should be looked at as whether or not achieves the goals that we set in the policy statement, and that's the Forward Dallas plan. The language is critical for us to provide guidance to the Plan Commission, to developers, to residents, to stakeholders of all types as to what the overall plan is for Dallas.
What do you want the next 10 to 20 years to look like for the city of Dallas?
I'd like the city to continue its growth in terms of population, economic development, and quality of life. I'd like to see a more walkable city that has sustainable development, that provides for a wide range of housing options for our residents, and preserves our existing single-family neighborhoods.
Now, you've served on the City Plan Commission and are intimately familiar with how this zoning process works. And do you think there's any merit to the statement that these zoning cases are rubber stamped, or if there is a development-friendly CPC or city council?
I don't think there is a rubber stamp at City Hall. I think that the Plan Commission and the council look carefully at the various rezoning applications, particularly in their own districts, and try to determine if they're for the benefit of their district and the city at large.
I watch those meetings, and if they're rubber stamping it, they sure take a long time to pull out the rubber stamp. And they
Good point.
defer a lot of cases. So tell me about District 14 and what kind of housing stock you represent.
Well, District 14 is the smallest district in the city geographically. All of the districts through redistricting have been reconfigured to provide equivalent populations so that one council member represents basically the same number of people as all of the other council members. That's the purpose of redistricting. And we just went through that last year. My district is the oldest in the city. It represents the core of Dallas. That is most of downtown, uptown, Oak Lawn, and much of Old East Dallas. It is a district that has a wide variety of housing. It has many single-family neighborhoods in East Dallas, in uptown and Oak Lawn. It's higher density housing ranging from mixes of duplexes and townhouses and more dense housing, sometimes on the same street. In downtown, we have a large amount of high-rise commercial development with an increasing number of residences, as many of the older office buildings are converted into residential buildings.
Do you need more housing in your district?
Absolutely. We need more housing throughout the city.
Okay.
We have a proportion of single family to multifamily in the city of 40 to 60%. And that is very low on the single family side for a large city. The other large cities, Houston, Austin, et cetera, in Texas, all have over 50% single-family housing. So we're starting with a fairly diverse range of housing types to begin with. We have many wonderful single-family neighborhoods in my district, but we also have higher density housing in the closer in areas of Uptown and Oak Lawn. And of course, the highest density housing is in downtown.
How do you feel about apartments?
Well, I think they're a great housing option for people who don't want the upkeep of single-family yards, who don't have perhaps the down payment to get into a house. In many cases, they're great for empty nesters who also don't want the upkeep of a single-family home and want to be around all kinds of activities, whether it be the arts or retail or close to entertainment districts. There's a huge demand for that kind of empty nester housing as well.
Where do you fall on incentivizing developers to build for sale homes or build affordable housing?
Let me deal with the single family housing first. That is something that I am in favor of in providing incentives through down payment assistance, for example, to encourage people to purchase a home. That's one of the changes that I inserted into Forward Dallas was a paragraph that encourages incentives for people to be able to own their own home. And that is something that we are already doing on a limited scale currently at City Hall for people who meet certain income limitations, who in the private market are not able to buy their own home. And so I think this is an important initiative. We have a tremendous need for affordable housing in the city, all areas of the city. And by affordable housing, I refer to workforce housing that are for people that are working, they're making steady paychecks, but they just can't afford market rate rents. And this would be particularly people who are civil servants, teachers, fire, police personnel, people who are providing essential services to our community, but aren't highly paid, many times because they're on government pay scales. I firmly believe that we need to make a place for workforce housing in our communities without forcing those people out to the far reaches of the Metroplex in a search for more affordable housing. We need to provide that in our close-in areas of the city. And one of the things that the city has done in furtherance of that idea is to develop a broad range of different types of incentives for the construction of affordable housing. One of them that I authored when I served on the Plan Commission many years ago was the idea of zoning incentives, so that when developers come in and say, I want to change the zoning to increase the height of my building so I can build twice as many units, then the question that I raised was, well, what are you going to give back to the city in exchange for this? Set aside a certain number of units that are at affordable rental rates geared to a percentage of median family income, and they must be the same quality units as all of the market rate units, and you must maintain those for a period of 15 years typically at affordable rental rates. And that, in addition to other kinds of financial incentives, have resulted in the construction of over 5,000 affordable units in the city of Dallas.
That's awesome. I didn't realize you helped to write that.
I did.
And they can also pay a fee in lieu, is that right?
Yes, that was an additional feature that the council added in 2022. The idea was that when developers want to build a high-rise building with expensive concrete frame construction, it is very expensive for their bottom lines and to be able to lure investors who will make the building possible for them to set aside very many affordable units at the lower rental rates. As a result, we saw many comments from developers saying, if you had a fund that I could pay into, you could then use for building stick-framed construction, which is much less expensive in other areas of the city where perhaps real estate is not as expensive, then that would be a way to get more affordable units based upon contributions to this affordable housing fund.
Now back to Forward Dallas.
Yes.
Because we're bouncing all over the place here. But at that September 25th meeting, you had a new amendment that you wanted to align the place type matrix with the text and the narrative in the plan. It seemed to me that there were some minds made up. There was a little bit of theater perhaps going on.
What, theater at city council?
I mean, I don't know.
Who ever heard of such a thing?
But what happened? What were you attempting to do? Did you anticipate that you were going to get support for that, or what was going on there?
Well, as you've correctly described it, I saw the need to align the matrix, which is the graphic portrayal of land uses in what are called place types. Place types are large areas of the city of different types of land uses. For example, there's a agricultural place type, there's a city residential place type, there's a community residential place type, which was the source of much of the controversy. And this place type is described by what land uses are permitted within it. And it has both primary and secondary land uses. And so the community place type has primary land uses of single-family detached and single-family attached, so that townhouses and duplexes are permitted as primary uses. Then there are also secondary uses, including more dense housing, commercial, institutional, such as churches, schools, etc., would all be permissible land uses within the community residential place type. And what I was trying to do was to align the matrix with regard to the primary use of single-family attached to the narrative of the plan, pursuant to some amendments that I introduced, as you mentioned, that called for there to be higher density in areas that were not in single-family neighborhoods, and that targeted that kind of density in other areas, such as commercial corridors, transit stations, vacant land that hadn't been developed, and transition zones between, say, single-family and commercial, where it was quite appropriate to have that kind of higher density housing, as opposed to putting it in the middle of single-family neighborhoods, which I was strongly opposed to, and which the Economic Development Committee supported my amendments to accomplish that.
Why not just change the matrix then? Like, why was that such a big deal?
Well, that's a good question.
Okay.
I thought it was a pretty simple step to take once the council was committed to the narrative portion, particularly the amendments that I had introduced to protect single-family neighborhoods in the Economic Development Committee. And there was widespread support for that. But for some reason, reflecting that principle in the matrix was a step too far for the council.
So does the plan now contradict itself?
I wouldn't say it was a contradiction. I would, first of all, point to the narrative language as the most descriptive portions and the most important provisions, frankly, of Forward Dallas. The matrix is just a graphic representation of what's contained, in part, a very simplistic way of what's in the narrative. But I think the narrative should be the real guidance for developers, for rezoning applications, and for stakeholders going forward.
So what happens now? The plan is approved. It seems like most people are okay with it. Is that the feedback you're getting?
Well, I tried to strike a compromise in my amendments between the very vocal position amongst single-family residents to any intrusion into their neighborhoods of multifamily housing. And on the other end of the spectrum, those people who wanted more housing options and more housing, period. I tried to accomplish safeguards for single-family neighborhoods, which I think we were very successful in doing. At the same time, we addressed our housing needs by targeting those areas of the city that are more appropriate for higher density housing, such as downtown is an excellent example that is very tolerant of high density housing. And as you get away from downtown, the density tends to become lower and lower. Areas of the city that are close to transit, highways, schools, workplaces, et cetera, are very well suited for high-density housing. I recognized the need for that. It just needed to be channeled to appropriate locations.
So the plan's been adopted. I'm a developer. I've got a project. I'm coming in with my proposal. It will now be evaluated under the new Forward Dallas 2.0.
That's correct. Now, the process of rezoning property has not changed one iota. It's still what it was before Forward Dallas was even being discussed. And that's a pretty rigorous process. First, they have to complete the application for review by city staff. Staff makes recommendations to the City Plan Commission. The Plan Commission holds public hearings. They send out ballots to surrounding neighbors or property owners to get their input. They have a public hearing where they take oral input from residents who are concerned about that particular zoning case. They then make a recommendation to the city council. We have another ballot that goes out to surrounding property owners, and we also have a public hearing with an opportunity for people to speak on it. And then we discuss it amongst ourselves in some cases and make a final decision. So that process isn't changed. I want to stress that is just the same as it has always been. It's just that process will be conducted with the guidance of the new Forward Dallas plan.
Do you think there is still any lingering confusion or fear around what's going to happen?
Yes, there probably is, as there is any time that there is a policy change at City Hall. And people, I think, got very involved, many people in this process, and I applaud them for doing that because this was an important issue for many people. But there are others who are coming to the issue late, and they've heard that something has been adopted at City Council, but they may not have gotten into the weeds on it, and they, I wouldn't be at all surprised, want to be more informed about that subject.
Yeah, the people getting informed, getting mobilized, getting educated. Was that the most public engagement you've seen on a single issue?
Well, I think it rivals short-term rentals.
Okay. What is going on with short-term rentals?
Well, that is in the courts right now. There is a lawsuit that was filed by some short-term rental owners trying to overturn the city council's ordinance that provided restrictions on short-term rentals. My understanding is that is going to be the subject this month of a hearing before the Court of Appeals for oral argument.
Do you still steadfastly remain no STRs in residential neighborhoods?
Well, I do. I fully supported the ordinance that we got passed in June of last year, and I hope that ultimately it will be cleared by the courts. It was written based upon prior court decisions of other cities' ordinances, and it was patterned in many respects on what other cities had done that had passed muster with the courts. And so I believe it is an ordinance that should be upheld by the courts and ultimately enforced by the city. It is not a complete ban on short-term rentals. It restricts them in single-family neighborhoods. It puts limits on them in multifamily zoning, but they are allowed up to a certain level in multifamily and without restriction in commercial zoning.
What do you think is going to be the legacy of this current council?
Ooh, that's a deep question.
You guys have done some big stuff in the past
We have.
year and a half.
We have made decisions on some issues that will affect residents of Dallas for many years to come. Short-term rentals is a good example. ForwardDallas, I think, which provides many more protections for single-family residential development than the predecessor, the 2006 version of the comprehensive plan. And so I think that was definitely a step forward. We've also looked at issues such as what to do about I-345 on the eastern edge of downtown and what its replacement should look like. We have approved the construction of a new convention center for Dallas, which is a major investment and will, I think, transform the southwest quadrant of downtown. That is the hope of many people, not just because it will provide state-of-the-art meeting space and draw in convention business, but also because of its fringe benefits, the development of the land around it, so that we'll have more hotel rooms, more commercial development, a more walkable district. We want that to be an active district that integrates with the rest of downtown so that it opens the door for convention visitors to enjoy the farmers market, the arts district, the discovery district, and all of the other wonderful development that we have downtown.
Good. All right. What's coming up? You got a couple of elections coming up. Any thoughts on that, on voter turnout?
Well, of course, we always have the highest voter turnout at the November presidential elections every 4 years. And we have both federal offices and state offices. The city municipal elections are not until next May. That will be the subject of a traditional separate election along with some school board offices. We also have charter amendments. That was one of the other big issues that the city council has worked on. That's something that we only do every 10 years after redistricting occurs. And we look at the charter, which is kind of the constitution for the city. It provides the terms for electing council members. It sets forth our salaries. It provides for various departments and commissions and generally how the city should be run. That will be the subject of, I believe, 18 different charter amendments, which will be at the end of the ballot, unfortunately, but nonetheless very important. And I recommend that everyone who plans to vote does their homework and examines just what those different charter amendments will do.
You all don't tell people how to vote or lobby for particular amendments, but you can encourage them to get educated, right?
Well, certainly, that's critical in our democratic process, that people be educated about how they vote so that they know who they're voting for, they identify those that align with their political impulses and philosophies, and on these kinds of charter amendments, they represent the kind of city that they want to live in.
Well, I know that elections are very important to you. I met your wife over a year ago at a League of Women Voters voter registration event. It was at the mayor's back to school fair.
Oh,
So,
yes, she's very active in that
yeah.
arena.
And what about May? Any predictions or thoughts or announcements you wish to make?
Well, I am going to be running for re-election.
Okay. Well, best of luck to you. I think that you have made a lot of people happy with the work that you've done on Forward Dallas. And I do want to ask you, and I asked you this before when we talked last week, but the politicization of this land use plan and the grandstanding, the posturing, the public speeches, do you walk into those meetings thinking like, let's just do the right thing, let's just.
Well, that's the approach I always take. And sometimes that requires seeing through the weeds to get to the heart of the issue and what really concerns our residents and what makes good policy. And so I think it's important to be engaged with your constituents to determine what their real concerns are. We did get many people who just said, vote no against Forward Dallas with nothing further. And that was, I think, a knee-jerk reaction to what they were hearing on social media or for friends and neighbors. And it's so important, I think, to be informed about policy issues before you express an opinion, so that you know what the pros and cons of different policy alternatives are and you can weigh them. And if at the end of that analysis you say, I don't like this about Forward Dallas, fine, then we can address that. But just to say no on a complicated policy document like that is not particularly helpful.
Yeah. All right. Well, there you have it. Thank you so much. That's it for this episode of Dallas Dirt. We will see you next time.